Mark stood at the stove, humming softly as he stirred the gravy. Our Friday night ritual, him cooking, me setting the table, 33 years of this peaceful routine. His phone buzzed on the counter. "Mark, I miss you," the message read. From Chloe at his office. For a moment, I just stared. Then something cold and clear settled in my chest. I picked up his phone and typed back, "Come over. My wife's not home tonight. Send." 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Mark's face went white as fresh paper. His wooden spoon clattered to the floor, gravy splattering across our kitchen tiles like drops of truth finally spilled. "Expecting someone?" I asked, my voice steady as stone. But I already knew the answer. What he didn't know was that tonight, his lies would finally meet his wife. If you're hearing this story, tell me in the comments. Where in the world are you listening from? Before we begin today's story, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Now, let's get started. The kitchen island stretched before Linda Myers like an altar of ordinary life. The quartz surface caught the warm yellow light from the pendant lamps above, each scratch and coffee ring telling the story of 30 years together. At 61, her hands moved with practiced precision as she sorted through the papers that seemed to multiply in late adulthood like unwanted weeds. A Social Security benefit letter lay flat against the granite, its blue government seal crisp and official. Beside it, a Medicare Advantage explanation of benefits displayed codes that might as well have been hieroglyphics. The mortgage statement reminded her, in cheerful bank fonts, that they still owed 12 years on this mid-rise condo outside Dallas. 12 years that had once seemed like nothing when they signed the papers. The dishwasher hummed its familiar cycle, a steady white noise that had become the soundtrack of her evenings. Above her head, the ceiling fan ticked with each rotation, stirring air that carried the rich smell of roasted chicken from the oven. The apartment felt warm, lived in, safe. Mark stood at the stove wearing the navy apron she'd bought him for their 30th anniversary 3 years ago. The fabric had faded slightly, but he still wore it with the same pride he'd shown that Christmas morning. At 63, he moved with the careful confidence of a man who knew his way around both a kitchen and a boardroom. His humming drifted over the sound of the gravy bubbling, an old Eagles song she couldn't quite name but had heard him sing 1,000 times. She watched him stir the pot, wooden spoon moving in slow circles. His gray hair caught the light from the range hood. He looked every inch the attentive husband she bragged about at church potlucks. The man who still cooked dinner twice a week and remembered to buy her favorite yogurt. His work smartphone buzzed against the granite counter. The sound cut through the peaceful kitchen noise like a small alarm. Mark glanced over his shoulder, steam rising from the gravy as he lifted the spoon. His eyes found the phone, then moved to Linda's face. She watched him wipe his hands on the apron's front, each movement deliberate. He flipped the phone face down with a casual laugh. Too casual. Too quick. "Spam," he said, returning to the stove. "They never stop, do they?" Linda pressed her palm over the Medicare statement, feeling the thin paper crinkle under her fingers. The texture was familiar, she'd handled dozens of these forms over the past year, each one a small reminder that her body was crossing into territory that required more monitoring, more care. "Maybe I'm just getting paranoid," she told herself. "Maybe turning 60 makes you suspicious of everything." The phone vibrated again, a small, insistent rattle against the granite that seemed louder than it should. She looked up from the papers. "You sure that's spam, Mark?" Her voice came out lighter than she felt, wrapped in the kind of forced cheer she used when the doctor's office called with test results. Mark turned toward her, gravy dripping from the spoon back into the pot. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, his sock feet silent on the tile floor. He kissed her forehead, and she caught the familiar smell of garlic and aftershave. The scent had comforted her for decades, but tonight it felt like a curtain being drawn. "Honey," he said, his voice carrying that gentle patronizing tone she'd grown to recognize, "you worry enough about co-pays and premiums. Let me handle the rest." The line landed the way it always did, half joke, half order. Linda heard herself chuckle, a sound that felt hollow in her own ears. Something inside her chest went colder, like a window had been opened in winter. She nodded and returned to the papers, but her eyes kept drifting to the phone's black screen. Mark moved back to the stove, humming again, but the melody sounded different now. Forced. The oven timer beeped, its digital display flashing red numbers. Mark pulled out the chicken, golden and perfectly roasted, steam rising from the crispy skin. He set it on the cooling rack with practiced ease. Then began setting the table with their good plates, the ones they'd registered for at their wedding and somehow never broken in 3 decades of use. Linda gathered the papers into a neat stack. The Social Security letter went on top, followed by the Medicare statement and the mortgage paperwork. She slid them all into a manila folder labeled "Retirement" in her careful handwriting. The folder felt heavier than its actual weight, as if it already knew it was going to be dragged into some kind of battle. She opened the kitchen drawer where she kept her pill organizer and extra reading glasses. The folder slipped inside easily, settling against the plastic containers and metal frames. As she closed the drawer, she caught sight of her reflection in the microwave door, a tired woman with worry lines that hadn't been there 5 years ago. Through the open balcony door, the distant whoosh of the freeway mixed with a neighbor's television murmuring cable news. The sounds of ordinary evening life in a Dallas suburb, familiar and comfortable. But tonight, those ordinary sounds felt different. In that mix of everyday noise, a thought she didn't like slipped into her mind. What if the biggest threat to my future isn't some phone scammer calling to steal my social security number, but the man stirring my gravy? The thought hit her stomach like cold water. She stood up quickly, her chair scraping against the tile floor. Mark glanced over, eyebrows raised in mild concern. "Everything okay?" "Fine," she said, moving to close the balcony door. "Just getting chilly." She twisted the lock, shutting out the Texas heat that still lingered even in late evening. The kitchen felt more enclosed now, the warm yellow light more focused. Mark was spooning gravy into a ceramic boat, the same one her mother had given them as a housewarming gift when they first moved to Dallas. "It's fine," she said out loud, her voice carrying across the kitchen. "We're fine." The words rang against the stainless steel appliances and the granite countertops they'd saved 2 years to afford. They bounced off the framed photo from their cheap first apartment in Fort Worth, where promises had come easier than mortgage payments and the future had seemed like something they would build together, brick by careful brick. But tonight, those words felt hollow. Empty as the space between what she wanted to believe and what she was starting to fear. Mark smiled at her, the same warm smile that had convinced her to marry him 33 years ago. "Dinner's ready," he said, pulling out her chair like a gentleman. Linda sat down and let him serve her, watching his hands as they moved hands. She'd held through flu seasons and job changes, through the death of both their parents and the slow realization that they would never have children. Hands she'd trusted with her heart, her future, her social security number on joint tax returns. As she lifted her fork, she caught herself studying his face in the light from the chandelier they'd picked out together at Home Depot. She was looking for something she couldn't name, some sign that the man across from her was still the man she'd married. But all she saw was Mark, eating his dinner and humming softly between bites. His phone face down beside his water glass like a small, dark secret neither of them was ready to acknowledge. The chicken was perfect. The gravy was smooth and rich. The conversation flowed the way it always did, touching on his work, her book club, the neighbor's new car. Everything was exactly the same as it had been for years. That was what scared her most of all. 4 days passed before Linda found herself alone with the truth. Mark had left early for what he called a client breakfast, his coffee mug still sitting on the counter with a brown ring staining the granite. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the floor where crumbs from his toast had scattered like small evidence of his hurried departure. Rain tapped against the glass with the patience of someone who had nowhere else to be. Linda sat at the same island where she'd sorted papers just days before, but this morning felt different. Heavier. The air itself seemed to carry weight. Her laptop sat open to their online banking page, the blue and white interface as familiar as her own reflection. She'd been looking for the Medicare premium draft, one of those automatic payments that disappeared from their checking account each month like clockwork. But the screen showed something else entirely. Her finger moved the mouse slowly, scrolling through transactions that should have been routine. Electric bill, grocery store, gas station. Then her eyes caught on a line that made her stomach tighten. Zelle M.N. The amount was small, $250. Not enough to trigger any alarms, not enough to make most people pause. But Linda had been managing their household budget for 30 years. She noticed when the grocery bill went up by $20. She noticed everything. She scrolled down. Another line, 3 days later, travel rewards online booking. $418. Then another, Zelle M.N. Again. Her hands felt cold as she reached for the notepad beside the keyboard. The pen clicked as she pressed it to paper, writing down dates and amounts with the methodical precision of someone building a case she didn't want to win. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the window with increasing urgency. Linda pulled up another statement, their home equity line of credit. She didn't remember the last time she'd looked at this account. Mark had always handled it, along with their investment accounts and tax documents. The page loaded slowly, as if the internet itself was reluctant to show her what came next. A blue bank logo filled the top of the screen, stark and official. Below it, a recent transaction caught the light from her laptop screen like a neon sign, draw $8,000. The date was from 2 weeks ago. A bright red notification banner hung below the amount, please confirm this activity was authorized. Linda stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. $8,000, drawn from the equity in their home, the home they'd spent 15 years paying off, the home. That was supposed to be their safety net when Social Security wasn't enough. Did I sign this? Did I miss a conversation? Outside, a delivery truck rumbled down their street. Its engine straining under the weight of whatever cargo it carried. The sound faded, leaving only the rain and the hum of her laptop's fan. Linda reached for her phone with hands that felt disconnected from her body. She scrolled through her text messages, looking for any mention of the HELOC. Any conversation about taking money out for home improvements or emergency expenses. Nothing. Her call history showed no missed calls from the bank, no voicemails about large transactions requiring approval. Just the usual spam calls and appointment reminders from doctors' offices. She opened a new browser tab and typed in the bank's customer service number. Her finger hovered over the call button, then stopped. What would she ask? Did my husband withdraw $8,000 without telling me? The question felt like admitting defeat before the battle had even started. Instead, she closed the laptop and walked to the kitchen drawer where she kept the retirement folder. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled out a pen and began circling dates on the HELOC statement she'd printed. Each circle felt like grading a test she already knew someone had failed. The house felt too quiet. Even the rain seemed muted, as if the world was holding its breath while she discovered what her husband had been doing with their money. When Mark called an hour later, his voice crackling through the Bluetooth in his car, Linda had a list of questions written in her neat handwriting. But when she opened her mouth, only one came out. I was paying the electric bill and noticed some transfers, she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Did we take out more on the HELOC? The pause lasted longer than it should have. In the background, she could hear traffic and the tinny sound of talk radio playing too low to understand. Babe, Mark said finally, his laugh sounding forced even through the car speakers. That's just moving things around for taxes. You know how messy Social Security and 401k stuff gets after 60. She pressed the phone closer to her ear, as if proximity could help her hear the truth hiding between his words. I don't remember signing anything, she said. It's electronic now, remember? You signed the authorization when we set up the account. I'll walk you through it tonight, okay? Trust me on this one. He said, trust me, the way a surgeon says, this won't hurt, with practiced confidence designed to stop questions before they started. Okay, Linda heard herself say. I'll see you tonight. She ended the call and set the phone on the counter, staring at the black screen as if it might display different answers if she looked long enough. The rain had stopped, leaving only the sound of water dripping from the gutters and the distant hum of afternoon traffic. Linda opened her laptop again and screenshot the HELOC statement. Then the bank transaction list. Then the Zelle transfers she'd never authorized. Each image saved to a folder on her desktop labeled questions, the cursor blinking after the word like a heartbeat. She pulled the Medicare card from her wallet, running her thumb over its plastic surface. The card had always felt like a safety net, proof that she'd worked long enough to earn some security in her old age. Right now it felt more like a tag someone had hung on her. When she wasn't looking, a label that marked her as old enough to be dismissed, old enough to be managed. The afternoon passed slowly. Linda cleaned the kitchen twice, reorganized the pantry, and started a load of laundry she didn't need to do. Busy work to keep her hands occupied while her mind churned through possibilities she didn't want to consider. When Mark came home at 6:30, he carried grocery bags and jokes about the price of avocados. His smile was the same one that had charmed her 33 years ago. Wide and genuine, and accompanied by the kind of easy laugh that made other people want to be around him. "You look serious," he said, setting the bags on the counter. "Everything okay?" Linda showed him the printed HELOC statement, the numbers she'd circled bright red against the white paper. Mark glanced at it for maybe 5 seconds before kissing her cheek, his lips warm against her skin. "You've worked hard enough," he said, sliding the papers back into her hands like they were grocery coupons. "Let me handle the boring math stuff. That's what I'm good at, right?" His tone was gentle, loving even. The same tone he'd used when he convinced her to let him manage their investments, their insurance policies, their retirement planning. The tone that had made her feel protected rather than excluded. "But $8,000, she started, "is nothing compared to what we'll save on taxes," he finished, already unpacking groceries. "Lynn, baby, this is my job. Let me do my job." Linda nodded and smiled, folding the statement in half and sliding it back into the folder. But later that night, after Mark had fallen asleep to the sound of late-night television, she crept back to the kitchen. In the drawer beside her pill organizer, she placed a bright yellow sticky note on top of the retirement folder. The note was small, crooked, and written in her careful handwriting, "Ask real questions." The words looked harmless in the dim light from the range hood. But Linda knew they were louder than anything she'd said out loud at dinner. They were the sound of a woman who had spent 30 years trusting without verifying, finally learning to count for herself. Outside, the Texas night settled over their condo complex like a blanket. The freeway hummed in the distance, carrying other people to other lives, other problems, other small betrayals discovered in the blue light of laptop screens. Linda closed the drawer and went back to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. She lay beside Mark, listening to his breathing, wondering when the sound had stopped being comforting and started feeling like the rhythm of a stranger. Friday night arrived with the smell of pot roast and rosemary filling every corner of their condo. Mark stood at the stove in his faded navy apron, moving with the confident rhythm of a man who understood the precise timing of a perfect meal. The oven glowed warm behind him, casting orange light across the kitchen tile. From the Bluetooth speaker on the counter, a local jazz station crackled with the kind of smooth saxophone that made Friday evenings feel like celebrations. Linda sat at the island with a home design magazine spread open before her, but the pages might as well have been blank. Her eyes skipped over kitchen renovations and garden layouts without seeing them. The words blurred together like background noise to the thoughts spinning in her head. Mark's work phone lay beside the pepper mill, its black screen reflecting the pendant lights above like a dark mirror. For 3 days, Linda had watched that phone with the intensity of a security guard. Noting when it buzzed, how quickly Mark reached for it, the way his face changed when he read messages. The retirement folder peeked from the partially open drawer at her knee like a quiet witness to conversations they still hadn't had. The yellow sticky note caught the kitchen light, its message, "Ask real questions," feeling more urgent with each passing hour. Outside their balcony, the Dallas skyline glowed faintly orange in the distance. Friday traffic moved along the freeway with the steady rush of people heading home to their own dinners, their own marriages. Their own small secrets hidden behind familiar routines. The phone lit up, not with a call, but with a message banner that appeared before the sound could even play. Linda's eyes caught the first line automatically, the way you notice movement in your peripheral vision. "Mark, I miss you." The sender's name appeared in smaller text below, Chloe Data Team. Linda's fingertips went numb. "I wanted it to be a mistake. Just once, I wanted to be wrong." The pot roast bubbled in the oven, its timer counting down in bright red numbers: 14:23, 14:22, 14:21. The jazz station played on, oblivious to the way her world had just shifted on its axis. Mark hummed along with the music, stirring something in a small saucepan, completely unaware that his life was about to change. Linda's hand moved toward the phone as if controlled by someone else. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her breathing stayed steady. She'd spent 3 days building up to this moment without knowing it, practicing the art of discovering truth in small increments. Mark stepped into the hallway to grab something from the coat closet. In those few seconds, maybe 15, maybe 20, Linda reached for his phone. His passcode was their wedding anniversary. Of course it was. 6 digits that had once symbolized their shared life now felt like a cruel joke, numbers that gave her access to secrets she didn't want to find. The message thread opened with the casual intimacy of people who talked every day. Not just work conversations about data reports and project deadlines. Late night, "You awake?" messages. After hours, jokes that weren't funny unless you were in on something together. A selfie from a hotel conference bar with, "Wish you were here," typed below the image. Linda scrolled up, her thumb moving faster as the timeline of betrayal revealed itself. 6 months of messages. 6 months of her husband building a different life with someone young enough to be their daughter. Her breathing stayed controlled, but her vision sharpened with the kind of clarity that comes in moments of crisis. She could hear Mark in the hallway, humming as he looked for whatever he'd gone to find. Without letting herself think, Linda typed, "Come over. My wife's not home. Doors open." She hit send and watched the blue bubble slide into the thread, joining months of other messages she'd never been meant to see. Then she screenshot the conversation and quietly emailed it to herself. The familiar whoosh sound of an outgoing message lost in the jazz music and the bubbling from the oven. Her hands moved with surgical precision as she deleted the outgoing text from his phone. Restored the chat view to where it had been, and placed the device back beside the salt shaker at exactly the same angle. The oven timer continued its countdown. 11:47, 11:46, 11:45. "Lynn, can you grab that for me?" Mark called from the hallway. "My hands are full." "Got it," she answered, her voice surprisingly calm. She pulled the pot roast from the oven, and steam fogged her glasses immediately. For a moment she was grateful for the blur, for any excuse not to see clearly. The roast was perfect golden brown and crusted with herbs, the way Mark had been making it for years. 20 minutes later, they sat down to dinner at their small dining table. Real china plates, the good set they'd received as a wedding gift and only used for special occasions. Linen napkins from their last Costco splurge. Mark had even lit the candles she kept in the center of the table, their flames dancing gently in the air conditioning. Everything looked exactly like the romantic Friday dinners they'd shared for years. Except Linda could barely taste the food, and Mark kept glancing at his phone. The doorbell rang at exactly 7:47 p.m. The sound sliced through the soft jazz like a gunshot, sharp and sudden and completely unexpected. Mark's fork paused halfway to his mouth, gravy dripping back onto his plate. His eyes flicked to his watch, then to his phone, then to Linda's face. She watched him search her expression for information he wouldn't find there. Her face felt calm, composed, almost serene. "Who the hell?" he started, then caught himself. "At this hour?" Linda set her napkin down, smoothing it once against her lap with deliberate care. When she looked up, her smile was almost sweet. "You stay and enjoy your special dinner," she said, rising from her chair with the grace of a woman who had spent 3 days preparing for this moment. "I'll see who's dropping by unannounced." Each step toward the front door felt like a hammer strike in the quiet condo. Behind her, she could hear Mark's chair scrape against the floor as he half rose, torn between following her and staying to figure out what was happening. Linda reached the door and paused, her hand on the deadbolt. Through the peephole, she could see a young woman in the hallway, sleek ponytail. Tight red dress, nervously clutching a white bakery box with, "Get well soon," printed in cheerful blue letters. The lie was already prepared. The excuse already in place. Even the prop was perfect. Linda opened the door. Chloe's smile froze into horror the instant she realized who was standing in the doorway. The bakery box wobbled in her hands as the color drained from her face, leaving her makeup stark against suddenly pale skin. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Linda just stood there, taking in every detail, the too careful hair. The dress that was trying too hard, the way this girl's hands shook as reality crashed over her like cold water. Behind Linda, Mark's shadow appeared at the end of the hallway. She could feel him there without turning around, could sense the exact moment when he saw Chloe standing in their doorway. And understood that his two worlds had just collided. The jazz station played on from the kitchen, smooth and oblivious. The candles flickered on their dining table, casting romantic light over a dinner that would never be finished. "Good evening," Linda said finally, her voice carrying easily into the hallway where her husband stood frozen. "You must be Chloe." She stepped aside just enough for Mark and Chloe to see each other over her shoulder. "Our door's open," she added, her tone conversational. "Apparently." Linda stepped aside with the practiced grace of a hostess welcoming expected guests. "Please, come in," she said, her voice carrying the kind of forced southern politeness that could cut glass. "Don't stand there in the hallway where the neighbors might wonder what's happening." Chloe stumbled forward, still clutching the bakery box like a shield. Her heels clicked against the tile floor with the unsteady rhythm of someone walking to their own execution. Behind her, Mark appeared in the entrance to the dining area, his face the color of old newspaper. The jazz station continued playing from the kitchen, its smooth saxophone now sounding like a funeral dirge. "Here," Linda said, taking the bakery box from Chloe's trembling hands. "Let me help you with that. You look like you might drop it." She set the box on the coffee table and gestured toward the sofa. "Please, sit. You must be tired from your unexpected visit." Chloe perched on the edge of the cushions as if the furniture might collapse beneath her. Mark remained standing by the dining table, trapped between the woman he'd married and the one he'd been lying to. Linda disappeared into the kitchen and returned with drinks. 2 heavy glass tumblers of ice water for herself and Mark, and a thin plastic cup from their picnic set for Chloe. The contrast wasn't accidental. Chloe noticed immediately, her eyes darting between the glasses like she was trying to decode a message. "So," Linda said, settling into her favorite armchair with the composed elegance of a judge taking the bench. "Chloe, that's such a pretty name. Tell me, how long have you and my husband been restructuring his schedule?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Chloe's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Mark stepped forward, his hands raised as if he could physically stop the conversation from happening. "Lynn, this isn't what it looks like," he started, his voice cracking on her name. Linda held up one finger, a gesture that had silenced him during 30 years of marriage, and kept her eyes on Chloe. "I'm sorry," she said, her tone patient. "I didn't hear your answer." Chloe stammered something about bringing cake because she'd heard Mark wasn't feeling well. The lie tumbled out of her mouth like marbles spilling from a bag, each word smaller and more desperate than the last. Linda's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Funny," she said. "He's been just fine at home. Eating very well, actually. Cooking me dinner twice a week. Being the perfect attentive husband." She stood and moved to the mantel where their wedding photos were. Displayed 33 years of anniversaries and holidays and ordinary moments that had once felt like evidence of a life well lived. "Mark," she said without turning around, "would you like to explain to Chloe why she thought my husband needed get well cake? Or should I guess? This is what they thought of me, something dim, slow, gullible. A wife so trusting she wouldn't notice if her own husband disappeared for half his life." The jazz station shifted to a new song, something with piano that sounded like rain on windows. Mark's breathing was audible from across the room, shallow and quick like a man who'd been running. "It's not," he started. "Not what?" Linda turned to face them both, her voice sharp enough to cut. "Not an affair? Not a betrayal? Not 6 months of you using our money to play house with someone young enough to be our daughter?" She walked back to the coffee table and opened her laptop, her fingers moving across the keys with surgical precision. The screen filled with screenshots, text messages, expense reports, hotel receipts she'd found buried in Mark's corporate credit card portal. October 15th, she read aloud. "Hotel bar, downtown Dallas. You sent her a selfie with, 'Wish you were here,' at 9:47 p.m. I was at home, worried because you said you'd be stuck in meetings until late." Chloe's plastic cup slipped from her hands, ice water spreading across the hardwood floor like spreading truth. Mark moved to clean it up, but Linda's voice stopped him. "Don't Sit down, both of you. Her tone carried the authority of a woman who had spent 3 days building a case and was now ready to present it to the jury. November 3rd. Italian restaurant on Henderson. You paid with our personal credit card, the one linked to our joint checking account. The same account where I manage our Medicare premiums and grocery budget. With each date, each receipt, each carefully documented. Lie. Linda watched Chloe's face crumble and Mark's defenses strip away like paint peeling from old walls. December 1st. Hotel room in Fort Worth. Charged to your corporate card, which violates company policy. Did you know that, Chloe? Did you know you're not just sleeping with a married man, but helping him commit expense fraud? Chloe tried to stand, mumbling something about an early shift tomorrow, about needing to get home. Linda's voice cracked across the room like a whip. If you walk out now, darling, I send every screenshot to HR, your parents. And that cute little LinkedIn profile where you call yourself an emerging data professional. Sit down, drink your water, and listen. The room fell silent except for the music and the distant hum of traffic outside. Linda returned to her chair, crossing her legs with deliberate calm. You know what's really wild, Chloe? She said, her voice conversational again. All this time I've been losing sleep over Medicare co-pays and our joint mortgage, lying awake. Wondering how we'll afford long-term care insurance, and my husband's been using hotel points and company perks to play newlyweds with the office intern. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving Chloe's face. Tell me, honey, when he took you to that fancy steakhouse last month, the one with the $40 entrees, did he mention that we've been eating ground beef and chicken thighs at home to save money for retirement? Chloe's face had gone beyond pale into something approaching gray. Tears started down her cheeks, carrying her carefully applied mascara with them. I didn't know, she whispered. He said you two were. He said the marriage was over in everything but paperwork. Linda laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Sweetheart, does this look like a dead marriage to you? She gestured around the room, the lit candles still flickering on the dining table, the romantic dinner growing cold on their good china, the home they'd built together over 3 decades. Does a man in a dead marriage cook pot roast in an anniversary apron? Mark finally found his voice, thick with desperation. Lynn, please, let me explain. This got out of hand. I never meant for it to go this far. Linda stood again, this time moving to the coffee table where Mark's phone lay beside the scattered ice. Without warning, she grabbed the device and hurled it against the edge of the glass table. The screen exploded into spiderweb cracks, shards scattering across the floor like tiny, glittering truths. Mark flinched as if she'd thrown it directly at him, his hands rising instinctively to protect his face. I didn't even know I had this strength left. Didn't know I could break something and feel relief instead of regret. The broken glass caught the lamplight in sharp, ugly angles. Each shard reflected a different piece of the room, the candles, the photos, the faces of 3 people whose lives had just shattered as completely as the phone screen. Explain, Linda said, her voice flat and final as a judge pronouncing sentence. All of it. And this time, pretend I can count. The jazz station played on, smooth and relentless, soundtrack to the complete destruction of everything Linda had believed about her life. After Chloe fled stumbling toward the elevator with mascara streaking her cheeks and the abandoned bakery box forgotten on the coffee table, the condo fell into the kind of silence that follows car accidents. Mark launched into the script Linda had expected. It meant nothing. I was stressed about work. You've been so focused on your pills and premiums. Each word sounded recycled, pulled from some manual for unfaithful husbands that must exist somewhere. The same tired excuses that millions of cheating spouses had used since the beginning of marriage itself. Linda felt strangely detached, as if she was watching someone else's husband beg someone else's forgiveness. The man pacing their living room, stepping carefully around the broken glass, might as well have been a stranger reading from a script in a play she'd never auditioned for. She moved to the dining table where their cold dinner still waited and began spreading documents across the polished wood-printed bank statements, 401k loan paperwork, the HELOC draw notice that had started her descent into this particular hell. Each paper felt like an exhibit in a trial where she was both prosecutor and victim. Red circles marked transfers to M.N. Mark's middle initial and last name, she now realized. Hotel charges appeared in neat rows, chronological evidence of a double life she'd helped finance without knowing it. Jewelry store receipts for pieces she'd never seen, restaurants she'd never been taken to, a geography of betrayal mapped out in credit card transactions. As she stared at the numbers, an old memory surfaced without warning. The two of them in their first apartment in Fort Worth, eating Campbell's soup at a wobbly card table because they couldn't afford real furniture. Mark had reached across that table, covering her hand with his, and said, "Stick with me, Lynn. I'll make sure you never have to worry about bills when we're old." The memory felt like looking at someone else's life through thick glass. Turns out the only thing he kept from those days was my trust. The refrigerator motor hummed from the kitchen. The air conditioning kicked on with a dusty sigh that stirred the curtains. Ordinary sounds in a house that no longer felt ordinary. Linda lifted their wedding photo from its place on the dining room wall, a silver frame they'd chosen together at Target 20 years ago, and set it face down on the table among the financial statements. The glass made a small clicking sound against the wood. Another memory bubbled up 10 years ago, when a phone scammer had called their landline with that old, "grandson in jail, con." Mark had taken the receiver, lectured the would-be thief about preying on elderly people, and hung up with righteous anger. "They pick on old folks who don't know any better," he'd said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders like a protective shield. "Good thing they called us and not someone who might fall for it." The irony tasted bitter in her mouth. She pulled out the Medicare explanation of benefits she'd been studying for weeks, the one with codes that had seemed like hieroglyphics. This time she read each line with the careful attention of someone who finally understood she'd been studying the wrong subject. Buried in the medical claims was an urgent care charge labeled, "stress-related chest pain," under Mark's member ID. The copay had been paid with their HSA card at a clinic near downtown Dallas, the same area where he'd been taking Chloe to expensive dinners. Linda stared at the line item until the letters blurred. She'd been funding his guilty conscience. Their joint health savings account, the money they'd set aside for her future medical needs, had paid for the anxiety attacks he'd suffered while cheating on her. The papers spread across their dining table told a story she finally understood: a man who'd systematically used their shared resources, their credit, their savings, their retirement security to fund a relationship with another woman. Not just emotional betrayal, but financial theft disguised as marriage. "When did I stop being your partner?" she asked quietly, looking up at Mark for the first time since he'd started his rehearsed confession. "And start being your cover story?" Mark stood by the window, his shoulders sagging like a man who'd been carrying weights too heavy for his frame. The broken phone lay forgotten on the floor between them, its cracked screen reflecting the overhead light in fractured patterns. "I don't know what came over me," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I honestly don't know." In that moment, Linda realized that not knowing wasn't a defense, it was the charge. A man who'd handled their taxes, their investments, their insurance policies, their entire financial life with meticulous attention to detail didn't not know anything. He planned. He calculated. He made deliberate choices about where to spend their money and how to hide it. She stood up from the table, gathering the papers into neat stacks: bank statements in one pile, credit card receipts in another, medical claims in a third. Each stack represented a different layer of the life they'd built together, now revealed as something else entirely. 33 years, she said, not to Mark but to the room itself. To the walls that had witnessed their ordinary evenings and quiet mornings and all the small moments that had felt like evidence of love. 33 years, and I never once thought to check your math. Mark took a step toward her, his hand extended as if he could physically return them to the conversation they'd been having an hour ago, before the doorbell rang and changed everything. "Lynn, please. We can work through this. Marriage counseling, financial planning, whatever you need. I'll do anything." Linda looked at his outstretched hand, the same hand that had signed HELOC documents without her knowledge. Typed love messages to another woman, paid for hotel rooms with money they'd saved for their old age. "The problem," she said, moving past him toward the kitchen where her laptop still glowed with evidence of his double life, "isn't what came over you. The problem is what came over me: 30 years of believing that trust meant never asking questions. She closed the laptop and unplugged its charger, wrapping the cord with the same careful precision she'd used to organize their bills for 3 decades. "I'm going to bed," she announced. "You can sleep in the guest room. Tomorrow we start figuring out what divorce looks like for people our age." The words hung in the air like smoke after a house fire. Mark's face crumpled, but Linda was already walking toward their bedroom, carrying her laptop like a briefcase full of evidence that would reshape the rest of her life. Behind her, the broken glass caught the lamplight one more time. Scattered pieces of a phone that had held secrets now spilled across their living room floor like truth finally set free. By Sunday morning, Linda had packed a suitcase and the retirement folder that had become her most important possession. The suitcase sat by the front door like a Declaration of Independence navy blue fabric worn soft from 20 years of vacation trips they'd taken together. Now it held 3 days' worth of clothes, her medications, and the manila folder that had evolved from simple paperwork into evidence of financial fraud. Mark knelt beside her luggage, his hands gripping her wrist with the desperate strength of a man trying to hold onto something already lost. Tears spilled down his cheeks, dropping onto the tile floor they'd chosen together at Home Depot 5 years ago. "I used to melt when he cried. Used to drop everything to comfort him when work stress or family problems brought him to tears. Now I just see water damage." The hallway light buzzed softly overhead, its fluorescent hum the only sound besides Mark's labored breathing. Linda looked down at his hands on her armhands. She'd held through 30 years of ordinary moments and extraordinary challenges and felt nothing but the need to reclaim her own space. "I'll cut ties with Chloe," he said, his voice thick with desperation. "I'll quit the job if I have to. We can downgrade the condo, move somewhere smaller. Marriage counseling, financial planning, whatever you need. Lynn, please. Please don't throw away everything we built." She gently pulled her hand free, her movements deliberate and final. His fingers slipped away like water. "I'm going to stay with Maria for a bit," she said, shouldering the laptop bag that now felt like armor. "I need a lawyer more than I need another apology." Maria lived 20 minutes away in a small bungalow that smelled of lemon oil and strong coffee. At 59, she'd built a successful practice handling employment discrimination and workplace harassment cases, turning her own experience as the only woman in a hostile law firm into a career defending other people's dignity. Her living room walls were lined with law books and framed diplomas, but the space felt warm despite its professional authority. Plants crowded the windowsills, and family photos covered every flat surface. This was the home of someone who understood that life was messy but justice was worth fighting for. Linda spread her evidence across Maria's dining table, printouts of text messages, photographs of broken phones, corporate credit card statements she'd somehow managed to access through Mark's email, the HELOC notice that had started her journey toward the truth. Last came their social security statements and pension projections, the future they'd planned together now reduced to numbers that would need to be divided. Maria listened without interrupting, her reading glasses perched on her nose. As she examined each document with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen too many women discover too late that their husbands had been stealing from them. "He didn't just cheat on you," Maria said finally, setting down a bank statement and removing her glasses to clean them slowly. "He used your shared retirement funds and his company's money to do it. That's misuse of corporate assets and potentially a hostile work environment for that girl. We're going to separate those issues: your heart, his job, and your future." Together they built a timeline on Maria's laptop: when the affair started, when the HELOC was opened without Linda's knowledge, which transactions corresponded to which hotel stays. Maria showed her how to access Mark's 401k account history through their joint online portal, and cross-reference it with travel rewards programs he'd been using for personal trips. "For years I let him carry the calculator, told myself I wasn't good with numbers. Turns out my hands remember exactly how to add when the math actually matters." The laptop screen threw blue light across the table as they worked past midnight, highlighting each line item that represented Linda's years of careful budgeting, her skipped vacations, her clipped coupons, her overtime hours saved for a retirement that was supposed to be shared. Every receipt told a story. Every hotel charge revealed a night when Linda had eaten leftovers alone while Mark built a different life with someone else's money. Every jewelry store purchase represented a gift she'd never received, paid for with funds they'd set aside for medical expenses and home repairs. "Look at this," Maria said, pointing to a series of small transfers from their savings account. $50 here, $75 there. Classic financial abuse pattern, amounts small enough not to trigger alerts, frequent enough to add up to real money over time. Linda traced the dates with her finger, matching them to her own calendar. Every transfer corresponded to a day when Mark had worked late, had client dinners, attended conferences she'd never heard about. The geography of deception mapped out in their own bank records. They drafted 2 sets of documents, one for Mark's company's HR department and corporate compliance office, outlining policy violations and potential harassment concerns, another for a divorce attorney, listing assets, debts, and the 50-50 equity in their condo that would need to be dissolved. For the first time in 33 years, Linda saw her name at the top of a legal document, not as spouse or dependent, but as plaintiff. The word looked foreign on the page but felt right in her chest, like finally using muscles she'd forgotten she had. "The company investigation will be separate from the divorce proceedings," Maria explained as they printed copies of everything. "But the financial evidence overlaps. If they find violations of corporate policy, it strengthens your position in the settlement negotiations." Linda signed her name at the bottom of the first document, a formal complaint to Mark's employer detailing the misuse of corporate resources for personal relationships. Her signature looked steady, confident, nothing like the shaky handwriting of a woman who'd discovered her husband's infidelity 3 days ago. "What happens next?" she asked. Maria smiled for the first time since Linda had arrived with her suitcase and folder full of heartbreak. "Next," she said, "we take your life back. One document at a time." Monday morning arrived gray and determined, Dallas clouds hanging low over the city like they were waiting to witness something important. At precisely 9 o'clock, Linda sat at Maria's dining table with a mug of too strong coffee cooling in her hands. The laptop screen glowed in front of her, cursor hovering over the send button on an email that would change everything. The subject line was clinical but loaded with consequences, policy violations and misuse of company resources by senior project manager. Attached was a 23-page PDF organized with the precision of someone who'd spent 30 years managing household budgets, chronological expense reports, screenshots of text messages, calendar entries that cross-referenced corporate travel with personal hotel stays. Maria had helped her redact Chloe's name just enough to protect the girl while forcing HR to conduct their own investigation. "Let them connect the dots," she'd advised. "It's more powerful when they discover the pattern themselves. This one click won't undo 33 years of marriage, but it can stop him from using my future as his company expense account." Outside, a garbage truck clanked its way down Maria's street, the ordinary sound of Monday morning responsibilities. Linda clicked send and watched the small progress bar crawl across her screen. As if she was uploading a weather report instead of evidence that would destroy her husband's career. The email disappeared into the digital ether with a soft whoosh. Within 2 hours, Mark called her cell phone, his voice tight with panic. Through the speaker, she could hear office noise in the background, muffled voices, the mechanical whir of copy machines, the squeak of conference room chairs. "They pulled me into a room with HR and legal," he said, his words tumbling over each other like debris in a flood. "They had everything, Lynn. Hotel receipts, budget reports, expense documentation going back 8 months. Did you do this? Did you send them my personal information?" Linda set down her coffee mug, noting how steady her hands had become. "I told the truth," she said. "For once in this marriage, the paperwork is working in my favor." She ended the call before he could twist himself into the victim, before he could make her responsible for the consequences of choices she'd never made. Over the next week, updates filtered back through Maria's network and Linda's former co-workers who still followed her on Facebook. Mark was placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. His corporate credit card was suspended. His laptop and phone records were copied for forensic review by the company's security department. Chloe disappeared from the office as quietly as she'd entered it, reassigned to a different division after what HR diplomatically called restructuring for optimal workflow. Linda felt sorry for the girl, 25 years old. and learning the hardest lesson about workplace relationships from the wrong side of a corporate investigation. A formal letter arrived at Maria's address a week later. Printed on expensive letterhead with the logo of Mark's insurance company, "We acknowledge your concerns regarding potential policy violations and thank you for bringing these matters to our attention. Please be assured that appropriate disciplinary action has been taken in accordance with company guidelines and regulatory requirements." The language was careful, legally vetted, designed to convey consequences without admitting liability. But Linda understood corporate speak well enough to read between the lines. Mark's career in senior management was over. Divorce mediation was scheduled for the following month in a sterile conference room that smelled of industrial coffee and regret. The mediator's table was covered with documents, mortgage papers, retirement account statements, insurance policies, credit reports that told the story of their financial life together. Mark arrived looking older, his suit wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. The confident project manager who'd once handled million-dollar budgets now sat slumped in his chair, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room. Maria sat beside Linda, calm and sharp in a navy blazer that made her look like exactly what she was. A woman who understood how to protect other women from men who thought love meant taking whatever they wanted. "Mrs. Myers is prepared to forego spousal support," Maria announced, her voice carrying the weight of documents they'd spent weeks preparing. "Provided she receives her full 50% of the condo equity, reimbursement for the HELOC draw that was accessed without her knowledge, or consent, and sole claim to her Social Security and pension benefits moving forward." The numbers were fair, more than fair. Linda was essentially walking away from a 30-year financial partnership with only what she'd contributed herself, plus half of their shared assets. Mark's lawyer shuffled papers and whispered in his ear, but everyone in the room knew the settlement was generous given the circumstances. "My client also waives any claim to Mr. Myers' 401k or corporate retirement benefits," Maria continued, despite her legal right to 50% of contributions made during the marriage. Mark's jaw tightened. He understood exactly what Linda was offering, a clean break that left him with more retirement security than he deserved, in exchange for her freedom from any future financial entanglement. The mediator reviewed the agreement, checking each clause against state law and community property requirements. When she reached the section about debt division, she paused. "Mrs. Myers, you're accepting responsibility for none of the HELOC debt, despite it being secured against the marital property?" Linda looked directly at Mark for the first time since entering the room. "The debt was incurred without my knowledge for purposes that provided me no benefit. I see no reason to pay for my husband's hotel rooms with another woman." Her voice was steady, factual, without anger or bitterness. She was simply stating the mathematics of betrayal in terms a legal mediator could understand. 6 weeks later, they appeared before a judge who'd probably seen 1,000 similar cases. Middle-aged couples dividing assets accumulated over decades of shared life. The courtroom was nearly empty, just the necessary lawyers, a court reporter, and 2 people who'd once promised to share everything now asking the state to split it down the middle. Today the court recognizes Mrs. Myers' financial contribution to the marital estate and grants her petition for dissolution. The judge said, his voice carrying the formal weight of legal conclusion. "The property division is approved as agreed upon by both parties." Linda didn't cry. She didn't feel vindicated or triumphant or even particularly sad. She just exhaled a long, slow breath that felt like she'd been holding it for months. For the first time since finding those text messages on Mark's phone, the paperwork was protecting her instead of hiding the truth about her life. Walking out of the courthouse into bright Texas sunshine, Linda realized she wasn't the same woman who'd sat in a kitchen sorting Medicare statements 6 months ago. That woman had trusted without questioning, loved without protecting herself, built a life on the assumption that marriage meant never having to verify. This woman checked the paperwork. 6 months after walking out of that courthouse, Linda turned the key to apartment 14B in Sunset Manor, a quiet 55-plus community on the eastern edge of Dallas where the rent was manageable and the neighbors respected each other's privacy. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning supplies, lined with artificial plants that never needed watering and mail cubbies that overflowed with senior center announcements instead of foreclosure notices. Her mailbox bore a simple label, L. Myers, not Mr. and Mrs., not the Myers family, just her own name in clear block letters. The apartment was half the size of the condo she'd shared with Mark, but every square foot belonged to her alone. The kitchen counter could barely accommodate a coffee maker and toaster. But she'd never had to wonder whose phone was buzzing or whose lies were hiding behind explanations about work meetings and client dinners. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like the state of Texas, were two important documents. A photocopy of her Medicare card and a handwritten note in her own careful penmanship, "Ask questions." All of them. The pill organizer on her small dining table no longer felt like evidence of decline, it looked like proof that she knew how to take care of herself. Most mornings now, Linda drove the 12 minutes to the Garland Public Library, where she'd volunteered to help other seniors navigate the digital maze of online banking, healthcare portals, and email security. The program was called Silver Surfers, which made her smile every time she heard it, but the work was serious. Teaching people her age to protect themselves from both internet scammers and the kind of trusted betrayal that came from sharing passwords with the wrong people. "You'd be surprised," she told the weekly support group that met in the library's community room, "how many financial predators live in the same house as their victims." When someone new to the group, usually a woman, though occasionally a man, expressed amazement at her computer skills, Linda would smile and say, "I didn't work in tech. I just learned the hard way that not all thieves call from overseas." The Thursday support circle at the Oak Cliff Senior Center had become the highlight of her week. 12 folding chairs arranged in a rough circle, weak coffee in foam cups, and stories that would have broken her heart 6 months ago, but now felt like roadmaps drawn by fellow travelers. There was Margaret, 67, whose son had stolen her identity to open credit cards. Frank, 71, whose wife of 40 years had emptied their joint accounts before moving to Arizona with her yoga instructor. Susan, 59, whose daughter's drug problem had cost them their house and most of their retirement savings. "The hardest part," said Janet one Thursday afternoon, stirring sugar into coffee that probably didn't deserve the effort, "isn't the money. It's realizing that the person you trusted most in the world was planning to leave you with nothing." Linda understood. The financial recovery from her divorce had been surprisingly smooth. Mark had signed everything without contest. Perhaps grateful that she hadn't pursued criminal charges for the forged HELOC documents. Her half of the condo equity had provided a decent down payment on the apartment. And her Social Security combined with the part-time library job covered her basic expenses. But learning to sleep alone in a new place, learning to make decisions without consulting anyone, learning to trust her own judgment about everything from grocery purchases to medical appointments that had taken longer than any paperwork. One afternoon in early spring, as Linda helped an 82-year-old widower set up two-factor authentication on his bank account, he asked the question she heard weekly, "Aren't you scared? Starting over at your age?" Linda paused, her hands still on the keyboard, watching the afternoon sunlight warm the library's polished floors. Through the tall windows, she could see the parking lot where her modest used car sat between a pickup truck and a sedan, vehicles owned by people who'd learned to manage their own lives without depending on anyone else's promises. "I was more scared staying somewhere I couldn't trust the person cooking my dinner," she replied. The man laughed, the kind of laugh people use when they recognize their own wounds in someone else's story. "My wife handled all our finances for 47 years, he said. "After she passed, I discovered I didn't even know how to pay the electric bill online." "Learning late is better than never learning at all," Linda told him, clicking through to his account settings. "Besides, we're tougher than people think we are." That evening, back in her small apartment with its second-hand furniture and carefully budgeted groceries, Linda opened the manila folder that had traveled with her from the old life to the new one. The documents were the same: bank statements, divorce papers, Medicare forms that had once seemed incomprehensible. But this time, the pen in her hand felt like a tool instead of a prop someone had given her to keep her busy. She pulled out a beneficiary designation form from her retirement account and carefully wrote in the name of the legal aid organization that had helped Maria represent women like her, women who'd discovered too late that their husbands had been stealing their futures one transaction at a time. For a long moment, she just stared at her signature. Her own name written in firm black ink on a document that would outlast her. Ensuring that whatever she'd managed to save would help other women escape the kind of financial betrayal that had nearly destroyed her. Outside her kitchen window, the Texas sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere across the city, in a condo that had once been home, Mark was probably eating dinner alone, surrounded by furniture they'd chosen together and memories that had turned bitter. She felt sorry for him, the way you feel sorry for someone who'd thrown away something valuable because they'd never understood what it was worth. For the first time in years, Linda thought, turning off the kitchen light and heading toward a bedroom that was entirely hers. My future feels like it belongs to me again. In the darkness, she could hear the gentle sounds of her new neighborhood settling into evening air conditioners humming, televisions murmuring through thin walls. The distant whoosh of traffic carrying other people toward their own carefully constructed lives. But for the first time in decades, Linda wasn't worried about tomorrow's bills or next month's medical expenses or whether the person sleeping beside her was planning to disappear with everything they'd built together. She had learned to read the fine print. She had learned to ask the hard questions. Most importantly, she had learned that a woman of 61 could start over with nothing more than her own courage. And whatever wisdom comes from surviving someone else's selfishness. The numbers in her bank account were smaller now, but they were honest numbers. The apartment was cramped compared to the spacious condo, but no one was using her address to hide secret expenditures. The future looked different than she'd planned, but it was a future she could trust because she'd built it herself, one careful decision at a time. Life doesn't end just because it breaks once. What falls apart can be the very place where we learn to stand again. If this story gave even a small moment of strength to someone out there, then everything Linda went through means something today. Every Medicare form she learned to read, every bank statement she finally understood, every difficult conversation with lawyers and mediators and support group members, all of it adds up to more than personal survival. It becomes proof that it's never too late to become the person who asks the hard questions, who reads the fine print, who refuses to let anyone else control the narrative of their own life. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe, and share a piece of your own story in the comments below. Your words might become the seed of the next chapter we create together. Thank you for spending this time with Linda's journey, and for believing that our stories, even the painful ones, have the power to help someone else find their way home to themselves.